Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. Cat Smith MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, you've repeatedly said that the economic mission of this government is to be on the side of working people. Is that still your position?
Yes.
Yes. And do you consider farmers, many of whom are getting up at 4 a.m, working 365 days a year, feeding the nation, to be working people, yes or no?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Because last year, rural communities, including many farmers, put their trust in Labour for the very first time in a very long time and gave us a mandate for change in this country. However, and I hear this from many of the 950 farm holdings in my constituency, feel like they were misled around the changes to IHT and APR, which are going to pull the rug from underneath farming communities and obliterate the family farm for many farmers. We're in a situation now where elderly farmers or farmers with terminal diagnosis are in a position whereby if they die before April, their farm will pass to the next generation with no tax implications. But if they die after, the potential of their family farm being completely unviable. Can you see how farmers can feel like this government hasn't necessarily treated them the way that they expect to be treated as working people?
Well, look, I do understand the concern, and I met with the president of the NFU just last week, as I've met with him before, to run through the particular concerns they have. I do think on agricultural property relief, there had to be sensible reform, and I think this is sensible reform. We did make an amendment in the budget, obviously, in relation to the spousal transfer, and more generally, we are sustaining £11.8 billion in sustainable farming this Parliament, so there's a lot of money set aside in the budget. There's a roadmap that we're agreeing with farmers as to the way forward, and of course Minette Batters, the ex-president of the NFU, has just completed a report for us on profitability and how we drive up profitability year on year, which I think is vitally important, because in a sense that's the missing factor here, which is the amount of money that farmers can make year on year, and we need to drive that amount up.
And the issue with the money that was in the budget is I think it's been overshadowed in the same way the Countryside Stewardship Fund has been overshadowed by the IHT issue. And I think that the political damage is that whilst the ambitions of government were, I think, quite right in terms of tackling tax avoidance that could go on in, like, say, large country estates, the collateral damage is that it's actually the small family farm which is feeling the hit of this. And the changes in the budget won't go any way to benefit one of my constituents who is 89 next month. He's already widowed, so he will not be able to benefit from the spousal transfer that has been announced. And given that you've been a Prime Minister who is, and I think quite admirably, changed courses in the past when issues have been exposed to the absolute reality of things, would you consider changing course on this issue?
Well, I mean, firstly, let me just reassure. I mean, the vast majority, 3/4, I think, of farmers simply not affected at all, and of those that are affected, the rate that's paid is half the rate that's over a 10-year period. In relation to the particular example, if you're happy to give me further details, I'll certainly have my team
happy, right, the Prime Minister look at that. One final question, Chair, if I may, and this won't have sunk in, I don't think, is the Prime Minister aware that some farmers who have terminal diagnosis now are actively planning to expedite their own deaths so they hit before April? Is he aware of that?
I've had discussions with a number of individuals who've drawn all manner of things to my attention.
Thank you very much. Alistair Carmichael MP.
And you understand, Prime Minister, that the basis for that actually sits in the finance bill itself. It's the provision called the anti-forestalling clause. You're familiar with the anti-forestalling clause, I think? Yeah, that means that anyone who transfers their property or their farm to a descendant but dies within 7 years will be liable to pay inheritance tax under the new system, and if they don't live 7 years after that, it could even trigger capital gains tax. If you do nothing, though, and you die before April next year, then the estate passes tax-free. Do we agree, Prime Minister, that nobody should be left feeling, as Cat Smith has just described, that they would be better off dying between now and next April?
No, of course, but governments have to bring about sensible reform and take
sensible
measures
reform, absolutely.
But things like anti-forestalling clause, they are not unique to this situation. But on a human level, the answer to your question is, of course, not.
But last year, you told me that this was a policy that was just aimed at revenue raising, that it wasn't targeted at anybody in particular. We've now seen the anti-forestalling clause, and we know from Treasury's own figures that 75% of the £500 million that is expected to be raised for this will come from farmers who die over the age of 75. So, is it not the case that actually this is a targeted measure, and it is targeted at, and it will affect those who are elderly, suffering from terminal illnesses over 75, and it doesn't matter if it's one farmer or 1,000 farmers. Surely you cannot be comfortable with that.
Let me just address the point that it's not targeted. It's not targeted at individuals.
Well, it was what you said last year.
It's not targeted, as I said last year. It's an economic reform which we took in the budget before last. Not targeted. It is to adjust the rate at which inheritance tax is, the fact that it's paid, the rate at which it's paid, and the period over which it is paid. But it's not targeted against individuals. I'm not arguing with you that there are therefore going to be individuals affected, as there are with any change in any tax regime. But there's a difference between changing the tax regime and targeting a group of individuals. This is about changing the tax regime.
The anti-forestalling clause that we've spoken about traps farmers into the new rules. It doesn't allow them the same opportunities that other taxpayers will have to use tax planning to manage their affairs in a sensible way that will allow the succession of family farms in this country.
That doesn't make it targeted. It is a necessary consequence of the decisions that we've taken. But I can assure you, as you would expect, the President of the NFU has raised this issue with me on more than one occasion.
Not just the President of the NFU.
Well, I appreciate that.
You've heard it from Cat Smith, you've heard it from my Select Committee, you've heard it from the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, you've heard it from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. These are all select committees, incidentally, that have majorities from the Labour Party, and they have all produced unanimous reports calling for this to be paused and rethought. You don't have to listen to me. You don't even have to listen to the farmers out there. You don't have to listen to the President of the NFU. But why do you not listen to your own party colleagues?
I do listen to party colleagues all the time.
And then do what you're going to do anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carmichael.
This moment at the Liaison Committee cut through the usual political language and focused on something far more troubling: the real human impact of tax policy. What made the exchange stand out was not the technical detail around inheritance tax or anti-forestalling rules, but the moral pressure created when the Prime Minister was faced with what these policies mean for elderly and terminally ill farmers. When a policy leads people to weigh whether dying before a certain deadline might leave their family better off, it stops being a theoretical budget issue and becomes a serious ethical concern. Starmer's answers relied heavily on procedure, pointing to consultations, percentages, and assurances that most farmers would not be affected. However, those responses did not address the deeply personal and painful examples being put forward. At the core of the exchange was a clear contradiction. A government that claims to stand up for working people is failing to explain why some of the hardest working individuals in the country feel left behind. This was not just a political disagreement. It was a clear warning that even carefully designed, well-meaning policy can fall apart when it meets the realities of people's lives.